Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to English, specifically varieties of English spoken here in the United States. If you're subscribed to this channel, you may remember that last month I made a wildly popular video called 4 Ways American English is Pretty Weird. Due to the conversation sparked by that video, not to mention the revenue, I now believe time is ripe for part 2. Of course, this only lends further weight to my previous assertion that the story of American English, much like the story of language in general, is highly compelling. If you've not yet seen part 1, I will link to it at the end. And if by some miracle you haven't subscribed to this channel, do that now. After all, my subscribers get to know things about me, such as, oh, look at Lawrence in his new specs. I can't wait to find out where he got them from so that I too can harness the general aura of a YouTube sensation. The answer is GlassesUSA.com, who I'd like to thank for sponsoring today's video. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, your ingenious logo incorporates red glasses. Won't blue frames clash with your branding? Well, firstly, I can have interchangeable logos, and secondly... You didn't think I'd stop at one new pair, did you? No, I went and got 3. Revel Drift Blue, Revel Sullivan Red Clear, and Revel Pit Stop Red.
And I got myself a new pair.
Very nice. There's just one question. How are we affording all of this?
I don't know. Maybe you should just let narrator Lawrence explain.
Well, it certainly helps that GlassesUSA.com glasses start at $39, up to 70% off retail prices. If you didn't already know, GlassesUSA.com is among the largest eyewear retailers in the US, offering brands like Ray-Ban, Gucci, Oakley, and many more.
They also do contact lenses.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah, but when you buy contacts through GlassesUSA.com, you'll get 25% off on all brands, including Vista, AccuView, Biofinity, Dailies, and many more. Shopping online can be fun, but it can also be extremely overwhelming, especially with so many options. That's why we loved shopping for my new glasses with GlassesUSA.com. They offer some amazing tools to help you find your perfect pair. One of these tools is the AR Virtual Try-On. We used it to find all of our frames, and it was super helpful. Also, shopping online at GlassesUSA.com is a risk-free shopping experience with free shipping and returns and 100% money-back guarantee within 14 days.
GlassesUSA.com is offering exclusive discounts only available for 24 hours. Just click on the links in the top of my description box to get all the details. Once again, thank you to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring today's video. On that note, here are 4 more ways that American English is pretty weird. In part 1, I told you this. While consecutive instances of the letter Z have inexplicably come to denote the sound of snoring, they also show up with surprising frequency in words that were coined in the United States. But in that sense, there's perhaps one letter that Americans like to pair together even more. The letter O. Ooh! You see, it all started pretty much as soon as Europeans reached present-day North America, as evidenced by a word featured heavily in my last video. See, the English word raccoon comes from the Algonquin word arakun. And long before the intergenerational rivalry between boomers and zoomers, themselves a product of American English, the US produced a deluge of other words with O digraphs. In linguistic terms, a digraph is when 2 letters pair up to produce a single sound, in this case. Ooh! From 1865, the southern US gave us the word doodlebug, a type of beetle, and a word that the British would later use to describe a form of flying bomb employed by the Nazis. Curiously, the word predates the US coinage of doodle, as in to sketch idly, by some 60 years. However, both words came later than whangdoodle, which was a fanciful American coinage of the 1850s, meaning a creature whose appearance is left to one's imagination. Whangdoodles later became a favourite of British author Roald Dahl, who referenced them in not just Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but several other works. And to this day, I still hear Americans use the word boondocks or boonies to describe a remote place. As it happens, this word was brought to the US by American soldiers who had been stationed in the Philippines, where the Tagalog word bundock meant mountain. In fact, boondocks is one of many B words in American English to use the O digraph. Additionally, American English has given us boondoggle, boogie woogie, Betty Boop, booger, boombox, and honey boo boo. And the O digraph is still alive and well today, with Gen Z embracing I am shook and let Lawrence cook. As in, to do his job supremely well, not actually cook, because you've seen my cornbread. That's right, in between setting the nation's agenda and waving from golf courses, US presidents have had a surprising influence on American English. I say surprising, they obviously benefit from having their every word documented for public consumption. It's just that in an oddly high number of cases, some of those words were being used for the very first time. In addition to the word belittle, Thomas Jefferson coined Anglomania, a word used to describe excessive enthusiasm for all things English, which is something that I still happily benefit from, so thank you. Many decades later, as the word okay was emerging out of northeastern slang, it entered nationwide and even global usage after the two letters were attached to the 1840 re-election campaign of Martin Van Buren. Supporters of Van Buren, whose head somehow looked like a cloud, formed something known as the OK Club. This was both in reference to the new word and the fact that the incumbent's nickname was Old Kinderhook, a nod to Van Buren's hometown of Kinderhook, New York. From then on, OK went mainstream across the land, despite the fact that Van Buren lost. And then came the story of why most Americans say normalcy instead of normality like we do in Britain. For answers, look no further than 29th President Warren G. Harding, who ran on the campaign slogan, "A return to normalcy." Is that he didn't speak like that. At the time, Harding was accused of using a malapropism, that is, the mistaken use of a word in place of one that sounds similar. After all, at the time, Americans overwhelmingly used normality. However, his alleged misuse of the word seemed to catch on. From 1920, normalcy, just like speakeasies, skyrocketed in use across the land. And then came the contributions of America's World War II presidents. Before the 1930s, the word iffy, meaning of doubtful quality and full of ifs, ironically, did not exist. That is, until it became a word favored by Franklin D. Roosevelt, who is believed to have originated it. In particular, he would brandish the word when dismissing hypothetical questions from the press. As in, the only thing we have to fear, no, that's JFK, is iffy questions like that one. And his successor, Harry Truman, took things a step further. Not content with coining a single word, he introduced or popularized two well-known sayings. His desk in the Oval Office bore a sign saying, "The buck stops here," a phrase that was little known before his presidency, but widely used after it. And then there's a phrase that we still use today that first showed up in print in 1942, when Truman was still a senator. In July of that year, an Idaho newspaper reported, "A favorite rejoinder of Senator Truman when a member of his war contract investigating committee objects to his strenuous pace. If you don't like the E, get out of the kitchen." Truman wasn't from Yorkshire. Anyway, this is the earliest known use of the phrase, with Truman later replacing "don't like" with "can't stand." Acronyms. In modern times, no country on earth has come close to the United States when it comes to forming snappy new words from the first letters of other words. In fact, as long ago as 1879, a fellow by the name of Walter P. Phillips issued something called the Phillips Code, which defined a new set of abbreviations and sometimes acronyms for words commonly used by journalists. The idea was that by sending abbreviated telegraphic messages like this, instead of their longer alternatives, both time and money could be saved. Think of it as the text speak of its day. In fact, as a result of the Phillips Code, Americans still use two acronyms that came from it, POTUS and SCOTUS. And as the 20th century unfolded, acronyms like this became ever more trendy in American English. Now, for the purposes of clarity, I'm defining an acronym as an abbreviation that can be pronounced as a word in its own right, like NASA, as opposed to an initialism like LITP, which must be spelled out. But in 1917, the US military gave us a word that historically belonged to both categories. The word AWOL, which stands for absent without leave, was initially pronounced AWOL. It wasn't until World War Part II that its modern-day pronunciation fell into use. And it was at this time that countless other American acronyms were drafted into the English language. Chief among them was radar. While radar technology existed in Britain and the US before then, the word itself is attributed to the US Navy, who coined it in 1940 as an acronym for radio detection and ranging. In recent decades, it has evolved into what's known as an anacronym, meaning a word most people no longer recognize as an acronym because its uppercase lettering and original meaning have been lost to time. Other examples of this phenomenon include scuba and laser, themselves products of American English. But for all the technical application of wartime acronyms, some were more sarcastic, such as one I still hear in America today, SNAFU, which means situation normal, all fucked up. And you might be thinking, snafu is the perfect word to describe this very video. After all, how dare I judge present-day American English by 80-year-old trends? Well, because those trends never really went away. Since then, American-derived acronyms have cropped up in all walks of life, from the corporate sector to healthcare to information technology. And in the last 10 years alone, we've seen the popularization of several acronyms, including one currently favoured by Gen Z, GOAT, meaning greatest of all time. Now, before Uncle Toby starts dunking on the youth of today, please remember two things. Number one, the generation before you once did the same. And number two, the acronym GOAT predates Gen Z by several decades, Gen Z. Actually, its earliest known use is attributed to one Yolanda Williams, otherwise known as Lonnie Ali, the wife of Muhammad Ali. In 1992, she founded Greatest of All Time Inc., stylized as GOAT Inc., to consolidate Muhammad Ali's intellectual property. Britain and America are pretty well known for not pronouncing words the same way. And when I first moved to the United States, there was one pronunciation trend that really stood out. The tendency of some Americans to pronounce str as str in words like strong.
Strong.
The utterance of a sound in a word that doesn't feature it seemed quite weird to me at first. But then I remembered two things. Number one, this English town is pronounced Lempster. And number two, linguistics undoubtedly has a word for such a phenomenon.
Well, does it?
Yes, actually. S backing.
Allow me to explain by taking you inside a human mouth, which is not as filthy as it sounds. Unless they don't floss. The human mouth is, of course, how humans verbalize their thoughts, but different sounds require your tongue to interact with different parts of your mouth. For instance, as an English speaker, I pronounce the initial consonant cluster in the word strength as stra. When I do this, my tongue glides between what's known as the alveolar ridge, where the S and T are articulated, to the post-alveolar position, where the R is articulated. This is also not a euphemism. But there's something you should know about the post-alveolar position. That's also where the tongue goes when articulating sh. Anyway, that's why it's called S backing, because in the case of strong, the S is articulated further back. Because of this, some phoneticians believe S backing could be the result of assimilation. Assimilation is when a speech sound is influenced by a similar sound that's about to come. An example of this in British English is when Brits pronounce handbag as handbag, because the M and B are both bilabial consonants, that is, they are articulated using both lips. Whatever the cause, if you're the sort of person that doesn't like it when Americans do this, there are two things that you should know. Number one of the lesser known characteristics of S backing appears to be that many speakers don't realize they're doing it until it's pointed out to them. Is that you? Let me know in the comments. And number two, it's not just Americans. While it is said to be most prevalent in American English, the phenomenon has been widely reported in other varieties of English, including those of Australia, Canada, and Britain. Yes, it turns out, particularly in the years since I left, that instances have been on the rise back in the motherland. So perhaps, at least on this score, American English is not quite so weird after all. If I've learned anything from this video, it is that Americans like their O's and their acronyms, and sometimes both at the same time.
Ooh!
I've learned that presidents, being at the centre of historic events, are well primed to influence the words we use. Even Benjamin Franklin, who might as well have been a president, coined the word harmonica. And I've learned that when it comes to American English, the truth is stranger than fiction. If you were absolutely obsessed with this video, here is part 1. You'll watch that next. Until the next time, goodbye.